Thank you for your attention. It's a real pleasure to be here, part of the International Conference Vortex 2025. And again, a real privilege to be part of this meeting and to learn so much about vorticity and vortex identification and vortex tracking. Most of my work is very much experimentally based. The experimental work is very much inspired by activities from individuals, for example, Professor Liu, Professor Hussein, Professor Shi, many other marvelous prediction, numerical, theoretical investigators. The title of my presentation today is Vortex Development and Quantification within Complex Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering Flow Environments. And I'm at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. So we've looked at the development, structure, characteristics of complex, three-dimensional, and highly unsteady vortex phenomena from 4 different physical environments. Realize this is simply a subset, a fairly small subset, of the diversity of different vortex environments that we've investigated in our studies. Had many different sponsors, from DoD to NASA to the National Science Foundation, for these different projects. I'm going to look at 2-dimensional channel flows with moderate curvature, flows in swirl chambers with a variety of inlet configurations, channel flows over arrays of staggered dimple depressions. In addition, kind of interesting microscale arrangement with low aspect ratio spiral microchannels. We look at detailed vortex, vortical and vortex characteristics. We look at the effects of the vortices on detailed flow structure and especially on surface heat transfer characteristics. I do a lot of work related to convective heat transfer and thermal management, so we're very interested in the effects of these vortices on the thermal management. We also use these vortices to enhance performance and efficiency of a variety of devices for a variety of practical applications. First of all, curved channel flows. We're talking about a very simple 2-dimensional curved channel, and it's astonishing the variety of phenomena that are present in these different channels. From laminar 2-dimensional flows, we then develop Dean vortex flows with arrays of counter-rotating vortex pairs. The Dean vortex flows, of course, develop because of centrifugal instabilities. We then go to wavy Dean vortex flows. These are something that was discovered by a gentleman named Warren Finley from the University of Alberta in Canada. The modes that we have also investigated, including undulating wavy Dean vortex flow and twisting Dean vortex flow. We then found very interesting span-wise wave number selection phenomena related to splitting and merging of vortex pairs, and I'll talk about that in some depth. We then go to transitional flows with arrays of Dean vortex pairs, finally fully turbulent flows. So realize a simple 2-dimensional curved channel, diversity of different phenomena that are present. This is the configuration that we looked at. Again, a typical experimental facility with highly controlled flow, but the important part here is a straight part of the channel followed by the curved part. So we get very well-developed flow in a straight 2-dimensional channel. We then get effects of the curvature afterwards. This aspect ratio of this channel is 40. The height is 1.27 centimeters. The ratio of shear layer thickness to curvature is 0.011, which can be considered moderate or mild curvature. We also have heat transfer. We make measurements of heat transfer with these heated surfaces that are shown by the black lines. So again, initial development, straight channel flow, then the curved channel flow. We then exit out here. And this is where we make measurements of surface heat transfer, flow structural characteristics, use hot wire anemometry. We get spectral variations of flow variations as well. This is the kind of phenomena that we look. We do extensive flow visualizations to illustrate the structure. We can find out a great deal about the flow, the unsteadiness, the structure from visualizations. We use things like wood smoke. We use things like particulates. We use even vapors to contaminate the flow and then visualize the flow. These are data, different angular locations, 85 degrees to 135 degrees. Going around the curvature, of course, halfway around the curvature would be 90 degrees. These are for a D number of 122 different streamwise locations. And I want to go down here and point out this. So this image right here, bottom surface is concave, top surface is convex. So you see these very well-defined and beautiful mushroom-shaped smoke patterns. This is an upwash region, these are downwash regions, so you get these very beautiful sort of patterns. The smoky part is the white part, the non-smoky part is the dark part. That's because we inserted the smoke on the convex side of the channel. So again, just focusing on this mushroom-shaped pattern here, this is the upwash region of a vortex pair. So there are two counter-rotating vortex pairs in this image. One is rotating clockwise, one is rotating counterclockwise with an upwash region between. There's then downwash regions around these vortex pairs. So this mushroom pattern is a very clear identifier of these vortex pairs. But realize the mushroom patterns are highly convoluted, highly unsteady. They oscillate, they move, they do all kinds of things. You can see in this particular image for 105 degrees, there's a very well-defined spacing of the different vortex pairs. This is related to a span-wise wave number preferred spacing and span-wise wave number selection of these different vortex pairs. So again, the flow visualization is extremely valuable in learning about the development of the vortices and the vortex pairs. It's not so developed here. We don't see the well-defined inwash or upwash and downwash regions are then developed further. So you see they evolve and then develop in a more complicated fashion as we go around the curvature. We then get very large counter-rotating vortex pairs. They then become more convoluted, more distorted in the image, which represents more unsteadiness. This convolution of the vortex pairs, again, very much related to unsteadiness. They then become even more unsteady as we develop at a location 135 degrees from the start of curvature. We also do measurements in the flow to kind of verify some of the time average characteristics. These are time averaged. We also do instantaneous measurements using different laser Doppler velocimetry and hot wire anemometry techniques. This is made with a miniature 5-hole pressure probe. Again, across the span of the channel, this is a D number of 120 degrees from the start of curvature. And what I want you to see here, this is radial vorticity distributions. Very well-defined vorticity distributions, negative, positive, negative, positive, negative, positive. This corresponds to the time-averaged locations of the unsteady vortex pairs and the time-averaged locations of the smoke patterns. And again, in this arrangement, the upwash region would be between these two opposite side vorticity regions, the downwash region here. So the vortices, the pair with an upwash between and then downwash around it. We then found something very interesting. We found very complicated and fascinating splitting and merging phenomena of the vortex pairs. The vortex will merge, they'll split apart. This is a time sequence taken at a D number of 105 degrees from the start of curvature, 1/30th of a second between images. Notice at the top, this is image A. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 vortex pairs, a large one. Notice what happens here. These things merge together. There's a vortex induction phenomena where the vortices merge together. We then replace the two vortex pairs with a single vortex pair. And you can see that happening right here. This happens again on the order of 10/30ths of a second, a third of a second. So again, we see this merging phenomena, but notice what's going on. The spacing before and after the merging is about the same. So we have a span-wise wave number preferred value with variations about that, a span-wise wave number selection phenomena. We also see things like sometimes a vortex pair will split and form two vortex pairs. So these things could be very interesting arrangement in which to test and evolve time average Lutix calculations. Notice here, another one that's emerging, nothing there, but then we see another vortex pair emerging. And again, notice here, the spacing. The spacing is the same before and after around the merging phenomena. If we have too many, there's going to be a merging. If there's too few, there's going to be a splitting. And so that wave number selection depends on the value of the wave number relative to the time average value. Some really fascinating splitting and merging. And again, we have great elaborate quantitative analysis of this with spectra, span-wise wave number variations in time, and spectra of the span-wise wave number values. But I'm really just trying to show you some interesting visualization. We then look at surface heat transfer, surface Nusselt number variations, and again, these are different D numbers from 100, 327, 629, 905. So we're interested in how these vortex pairs affect the surface heat transfer, the surface Nusselt numbers. Let's look at this one down at the bottom, D number of 100. This is the Nusselt number versus X over D. This part is the straight part of the channel. Here's the curve. So again, we've got very nicely well-behaved flow at the end of the straight part. This dashed line is fully developed laminar flow. So you see our data follow that. They then decrease. We then have this variation in the curved part. Higher Nusselt numbers on the concave surface relative to the convex surface, entirely due to the presence and unsteadiness of the array of vortex pairs. We then see this as more pronounced as we go up. This is due to some undulating phenomena. We then go up here and then we deviate. We're now getting into transitional and turbulent phenomena in the straight part of the channel. Very much a transition here, then a decrease and so forth. So many different phenomena are occurring in this one. And again, we always see higher Nusselt numbers on the concave surface than on the convex surface for this curved channel flow. We then also looked at swirl chambers. Swirl chambers are a cylinder, and we have a diverse variety of unsteady phenomena with an incredible range of length scale. Large length scales, tiny length scales even on the verge of viscous dissipation. These flows are highly turbulent, but also length scales related to the development of arrays of Gortler vortices. So we've looked at Dean vortices, we've looked at Gortler vortices, and again, we see the Gortler vortices developing after the inlet along the concave surface. And of course, Gortler vortices also develop due to the presence of centrifugal instabilities. Secondary vortex arrays also develop in the shear layers, so they're primary Gortler vortices than other secondary vortices. So an incredible variety. This gives you an idea of what the swirl chamber looks like. We have an inlet which comes in sort of circumferentially and tangent to the circumferential or the circumference of the swirl chamber. This makes the flow swirl. Okay, we come in from the inlet, the flow then swirls downstream, and that's why we call it a swirl chamber or a cyclone chamber. As the flow leaves the inlet and encounters the concave surface, arrays of Gortler vortices form. These then advect and swirl. So we've got Gortler vortices downstream of the inlet, they then advect, and then they swirl around the circumference. This kind of shows you the extent of one of the swirl chambers we've tested. And again, there's the inlet, sort of tangential to the circumference coming in, and then the flow swirls around. We have an outlet way down here. In this case, we have two inlets. The second inlet then revitalizes the flow, reestablishes flow coming in with a new array of Gortler vortices. So again, the inlet comes in, concave surface, then an array of Gortler vortices form. The Gortler vortices can be incredibly unsteady and complex. This is a time sequence at a certain location for Reynolds number of 5440. Coming over here, you see the vortices will then form. You'll see them in highly three-dimensional and distorted and very, very complicated variations in time. And again, the time interval between these different sequences, 0.1 seconds. Sometimes, for certain conditions, the Gortler vortices are well established, and they're sort of in an approximately sort of stationary form relative to the time average. This is a condition we have highly unsteady Gortler vortices. This is just downstream of the inlet. We then see variations as we change the Reynolds number. Again, this is a cross-sectional plane just downstream of the second inlet at a certain streamwise location. And again, here we see Gortler vortices across here, but very distorted as we look at different span locations. Smaller ones, larger ones, incredibly large ones for the lower Reynolds number. Notice they become less pronounced and less large. They're smaller as the Reynolds number increases. So incredibly complex behavior in the swirl chamber due to the presence of Gortler vortices. We then also do time average work. The part I want to focus your attention is down here. Circumferential vorticity, negative, positive, negative, positive. So even though we have these Gortler vortices that are unsteady, we can see very distinct signatures of the Gortler vortex pairs in the time averaged vorticity distributions. This is surface heat transfer data. This is a surface Nusselt number distribution. This is a streamwise location. That's a circumferential location. But the thing I want you to notice right here, these tracks, this is just downstream of the inlet. This is taken with infrared thermography. These tracks along here are from the presence of pairs of Gortler vortices advecting along the concave surface. So very distinct signatures of the Gortler vortices on the local Nusselt number variations. We can also control the vortices by using something called controlled inlet forcing, and we can go from the arrangement on the left, where we have sort of well-defined number of Gortler vortices, but change their number and their character by using controlled inlet forcing. We then change the effect of the vortices on the flow, on the pressure variations, the structure, and the changes on the heat transfer. We've done a lot of work with dimple arrays. Many, many studies supported by, again, the National Science Foundation, by Pratt & Whitney Canada, by Solar Turbines, many industry entities, many other entities. We've also had funding from DoD entities to look at dimple arrays. Dimple arrays are simply a surface with a bunch of dimples on it, and this shows the arrangement. A channel like this, the dimples are on the bottom surface, that depth of the dimples relative to this, and we've looked at ratios of channel height to dimple print diameter, 0.2, 0.25, 0.5, 1.0. So here's our channel height here, the dimples are here, and the diameter, this is called the dimple print diameter, 5.08 centimeters. So these are indentations on the surface. They're going into the surface. Ratios of dimple depth to dimple print diameter, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3. The kind of arrangement is like this. And again, remember, these are in an array on the surface, and they're indentations. Each dimple is like that. This is an individual dimple geometry with a ratio of depth to print diameter of 0.2. So there's our depth, there's our print diameter, and that's what they're doing. And again, these things are arranged in this array on the surface. What happens as the flow is progressing along this surface, vortices are ejected from the central part of each dimple. Each dimple has a vortex pair that's ejected. Then, in addition, vortex pairs form along the edge of each dimple on both edges. The vortex pairs that form along the edge of this dimple, then advect down here, then they're next to the edge of the next dimple, and they advect sort of along this arrangement between the dimples. So they're vortex pairs that form near the edges of the dimples. They then interact with other dimples that are downstream. So this creates a very, very interesting vortical environment with many arrays of unsteady dimples that then interact and do things like augment the surface heat transfer. And again, very interesting and complicated arrays. We've then measured things like surface Nusselt number ratio distributions. This is with a Reynolds number of 20,000, certain temperature ratio, dimple depth to print diameter 0.2. Flow is going in the X over D direction from left to right. You can see the signatures of the presence of the dimples by these patterns. And the flow going along here, again, from left to right, going in this direction, and we're seeing, so if you look at this dimple right here, we'll see the flow coming here, we'll then see augmented Nusselt numbers along this edge, then along this edge, and then downstream. These edge alterations are from the edge vortex pairs that interact with the different dimples. This variation downstream is because of the vortices that are shed from the dimples. So each dimple periodically sheds a pair of vortices. This is done periodically. Then there are also edge vortex pairs that are generated on the edges of the dimples. So we saw this variation of surface heat transfer. We thought, what is causing this? This gives you an idea. So this is an instantaneous flow visualization image in a cross-sectional plane, just downstream of the dimple in the 9th row. The dimple is going from there to there, right along there. We're just downstream of the edge of that dimple. And there's another dimple on the other side here, but we're looking at the dimple right here. And you can see the visualization that's going on. This was done with smoke wires. We then have a central vortex pair, which is partially here and partially here. This is periodically shed from the central part of the dimple. Then we have these edge vortex pairs near the dimple edge, and you can see a pair right there and a pair right there. These edge vortex pairs, the central vortex pairs, are what are most responsible in augmenting the surface Nusselt numbers, the surface heat transfer. And again, realize everything is very unsteady. Everything is oscillating, everything is moving, but the central vortex pairs are ejected in a periodic fashion from a given maximum with respect to Reynolds number, a larger depth that increases. If we go to delta over D of 0.3, our maximum vorticity increases dramatically with Reynolds number. So you see, we can then control the magnitude of maximum vorticity, the overall vorticity. We can then control the heat transfer augmentations by controlling the dimple geometry, going from a very deep dimple to a moderate depth dimple to a shallow dimple with very different kind of flow structural behavior. We then did visualizations in different planes. These are diagonal planes, streamwise planes. Time is increasing down here, different views. We looked at various things. We analyzed this carefully, and we actually see a number of events that are occurring. This is a time sequence of what happens. Remember, I said the central vortex pair is periodically shed from each dimple. This kind of illustrates that. This shows an inrush to the dimple with secondary flows within the dimple, further inrush, then the development of a vortex pair. The vortex pair then evects downstream, is then ejected from the dimple. This periodic inrush ejection of the vortex pair is occurring all the time for all the dimples. So a very highly unsteady phenomena. And this is for certain conditions that are occurring, and I've kind of illustrated flows within the dimple and outside. So very fascinating, unsteady, complicated, vortex development, vortex phenomena, highly unsteady, highly three-dimensional from this array of dimples. And again, just kind of give you a flavor of some of the things we work on and think about in regard to vortex flows. This is a very different kind of approach, different kind of arrangement. This is a micro-scale spiral, Archimedes spiral channel. So it's a spiral channel, but it's called an Archimedes spiral. And I worked on this with some wonderful people at a number of different places, and at the University of Cincinnati, and did some really fascinating visualization flow structure work. And in this flow, there are counter-rotating Dean vortices. They exist in a state of steady rotation and amplitude, and we look at different aspect ratios, different D numbers. We actually use confocal microscopy to capture the dye. We use a fluorescein dye in water in order to visualize the flow. So realize when you're visualizing the flow, you need to put a dye or a smoke, but you want part that's not the dye. It's the contrast between the dye and the smoke and the non-dye and smoke part that allows you to see events. So this is the kind of arrangement that we've investigated. This spiral microchannel is used for separating things. It's a fractionation tool. It's used for separating things like particulates and for things like cells, like blood cells. Okay, here is the arrangement of this thing. The size of the channel I'm going to talk about, the cross-section is 150 micrometers by 250 micrometers. So we're talking about a very, very tiny little channel. So realize the flows are largely laminar with other things imposed upon it. This is called our G1 spiral microchannel. With the cross-sectional dimensions shown right there, have 3 different inlets. We then put that fluorescein dye in inlet number 1, then it vects around here. We then go through a spiral further, and then we go through an exit. So realize this is like a curved channel We're dealing with microscale Dean vortex structures. I'm going to show you the behavior of this thing at different cross sections, B, C, D, and E. Realize that B, C, D, and E are in the outer spiral. We then go to F, G, H, and I in the inner spiral. And again, that green kind of shows the track. So again, realize when we're doing this, we put in the fluorescein dye. We want part of the flow to have fluorescein dye, part of it to be free from fluorescein dye, and it's the contrast that allows us to visualize behavior. We then kind of illustrate what's happening. This comes in near the convex surface. It then's rearranged with different Dean vortex pairs. And then ultimately, the two counter-rotating vortices turns into 4 counter-rotating vortices with 2 different pairs. This is, again, we're sort of using 1/3 confinement of the fluorescein dye to visualize vortex development in the G1 spiral microchannel. And again, part of it with fluorescein dye, part not, and the result we get is shown right here. And again, my diagram of the arrangement shown here, location B right down here. This is the convex surface. This is the concave surface. And again, we're looking at a channel with the dimensions of 250 micrometers by 150 micrometers right there. And we see the dye rearranges here. This is sort of indicating, well, there's some sort of counter-rotating vortex pair here. The local Dean number based on the geometry 28.2. We then go to 28.4, or we go to the same, almost the same Dean number in every case, a little bit of variation. So this is location B, just at the beginning of the spiral. We then go to location C. We see that this secondary advection rearrangement of the dye is more pronounced. Again, evidence of a counter-rotating vortex pair. Even more pronounced here, very well-defined vortex pair with an upwash region here, counter-rotating regions here. This is illustrated by this diagram, which is shown over here. So again, the development of very interesting and fascinating vortex pair in a flow which is ordinarily nominally laminar. So I have these vortex pairs imposed on this. The vortex pair then becomes even more pronounced at location E. We then go into the second spiral from E on over to F and G. There's F. We're starting to see 2 counter-rotating vortex pairs here. And there we are. Again, and you can see some information about the different vectors in the pair. These are, of course, flow cross-sections. We then go to this one, even more pronounced. So we have done a lot of work related to vortices and vortex flows. We've had many wonderful inspirations in our work. My work is largely experimental, but I collaborate with people who do numerical predictions of these flows. We also do a lot of quantitative flow measurements and analysis and further detailed heat transfer. What I've done here is simply show you some interesting and different visualization images. So I've illustrated a variety of vortex flows that exist in 4 different environments: curved channel flows, swirl chamber flows, dimple array flows, spiral microchannel microscale flows. And I've done this to inspire you to further examine these flows. And of course, we're going to start working using LUTEX to identify different flow phenomena. To do that, we're going to use some of our numerically predicted results. We have a 3-dimensional time-varying flow field. Use that to apply LUTEX. And again, thank you very much for your attention.